there is a moment that almost no one talks about. It doesn't look dramatic from the outside. There's no explosion, no screaming, no dramatic exit. In fact, to the untrained eye, it looks like nothing at all. But inside the empath, something dies. Not the empaths themselves, something else. Something that was keeping you safe without you ever knowing it. The invisible bridge they built between your worst moments and your best excuses. The quiet labor of someone who felt your pain before you even named it and chose to stay anyway. Most people assume empaths are soft, endlessly forgiving, infinitely available, and so they push and push and push. They don't realize they're standing on a fault line until the earthquake comes. And when it does, and it always does, they discover something psychology has quietly documented for decades. The most dangerous turning point in any relationship is not the moment someone gets angry. It is the moment an empath goes silent, calm, still. That stillness, that is not peace, that is completion. Part 1. The architecture of an empath's silence. Most people misunderstand what an empath actually is. They picture someone fragile, weepy, overwhelmed by feelings, someone who wears their sensitivity like an open wound. And yes, in the early stages, that's partially true, but that is only the first layer, the surface, the misread chapter. What researchers in affective neuroscience have observed, and what Carl Jung intuited decades before the technology existed to prove it, is that empaths do not simply feel emotions. They process them at a neurological depth that most people never reach. Their nervous system is, quite literally, wired differently. More mirror neurons, deeper limbic resonance, a psychic architecture designed not for self-protection, but for connection. And here is what that means in practice. An empath does not just hear what you say, they feel what you meant. They absorb the grief beneath your anger, the fear beneath your cruelty, the loneliness beneath your manipulation. They see into you, sometimes deeper than you see into yourself. And for a long time, that sight inspires compassion. They forgive because they understand. They stay because they feel your pain as their own. They give because they are wired, almost compulsively, toward healing the fractures in people they love. But here is what almost no one talks about. That capacity has a ceiling. Not a soft limit, not a gentle suggestion, a hard, structural ceiling, built into the very nervous system that makes them who they are. When you push an empath past that ceiling, through repeated betrayal, through contempt, through using their sensitivity as a weapon against them, something in their subconscious completes a calculation. And that's when the balance of power reverses. Not through drama, not through retaliation, through something far more permanent. This is where the empath's evolution changes everything. Part 2. The 3 stages of an empath's awakening. Stage 1. The unconscious phase. In the beginning, the empath does not know what they are. They only know that they feel more. Those rooms change when people enter them, that they absorb moods the way fabric absorbs water. In this stage, they mistake their sensitivity for weakness. They apologize for feeling too much. They shrink themselves to make others comfortable. They pour endlessly into relationships, into people, into situations, because the giving feels like purpose. They stay too long. They forgive too quickly. They explain away cruelty with the very empathy that is being exploited. This is the phase where they are most vulnerable, not because they are weak, but because they haven't yet understood that a gift without boundaries becomes an invitation. Stage 2. The awakening. Then comes the crisis. This is the most painful phase, the dark night. The moment the empath cannot unknow what they now know. They begin to see the pattern, not just this relationship, but all of them. The way their care was rationed and weaponized. The way their sensitivity was mocked in the very moments they offered it honestly. The way they were labeled too much by people who were simply giving too little. And the pain of this phase is not just betrayal, it's the grief of self-recognition. Why did I keep going back? Why did I keep explaining myself? Why did I feel responsible for their emptiness? They oscillate. Old patterns pull. Guilt floods in when they set a boundary. They feel selfish for protecting themselves. The nervous system that was trained to merge now has to learn to separate, and that rewiring is agony. But here's the part no one expects. The pain of this stage is not punishment. It is initiation. Stage 3, the integration. On the other side of that agony lives someone unrecognizable to those who once took them for granted. Not harder, not colder, anchored. The empath who has passed through the fire no longer absorbs indiscriminately. They choose where their energy goes. They feel everything still, but they are no longer governed by it. Their empathy has become a sovereign instrument rather than an open wound. They are quiet now, calm in a way that unsettles those who expected endless accommodation. They no longer chase, convince, or over-explain. They have become immune, not to feeling, but to manipulation. And that immunity, it is the most powerful thing in any room. In the next part, we'll explore exactly how that transformation happens internally, step by step, through what psychology calls the still method. Part 3, the still method and the death of endless tolerance. This is not a technique. It is a psychological sequence, one that happens, consciously or not, in every empath who reaches full integration. The S, saturation. This is the moment the system can no longer absorb. Not a choice, a limit. The empath reaches total saturation, every reservoir full, every boundary crossed one final time. Something in the unconscious records it and closes the file, not in anger, in completion. The old story ends here, not with a fight, but with a quiet, internal door closing. The T, translation. This is the most misunderstood step. The empath translates pain into information, not into grudges, into data. They stop asking, why did they do this to me, and start seeing, this is what this person is capable of. The story shifts from personal wounds to clear-eyed observation. This translation strips the other person of their power, because you cannot manipulate someone who has stopped misreading your behavior as love. The I, individuation, borrowed from Jung and precisely accurate. The empath stops defining themselves through the emotional needs of others. They begin the radical act of returning to their own center. This is not selfishness. This is the psychological birth of a self that was always there, but buried under the weight of everyone else's unprocessed pain. Old identities collapse here. The fixer, the peacemaker, the too sensitive one. They dissolve, not violently, but permanently. The L, liberation through limits. This is the step that frightens people who depended on the empath's boundlessness. The empath discovers that a boundary is not a wall. It is a declaration of self-respect. And once that declaration is made and held, once the empath proves to their own nervous system that they can enforce it, a freedom arrives that no external relationship can give or take. The last L, lucidity, the final shift. The empath sees clearly now, themselves, others, patterns, dynamics, without the distortion of guilt, obligation, or the compulsive need to rescue. They operate from choice. Every interaction becomes intentional. Every investment becomes deliberate. The fog of emotional merger lifts, and what remains is precision. Quiet, luminous, unshakable. Something strange happens at this stage. The people who once called them too sensitive suddenly find them difficult to read, because a person who has mastered their own interiority gives you nothing to exploit. In the final part, we'll uncover what the empath becomes on the other side of this, and answer the question they never thought to ask. Part 4. The Sovereign Self and the End of Invisible Labor. The goal was never to become someone who feels less. It was to become someone who can no longer be diminished by those who feel nothing. That is the paradox at the heart of every empath's journey. They didn't pursue power. They pursued peace. They didn't seek control. They sought connection. But in the process of refusing to abandon themselves any further, they discovered something no amount of strategy could manufacture: genuine authority. Not the authority of volume or dominance. The authority of someone who knows exactly who they are and requires no one's confirmation of it. The integrated empath does not battle their history. They have resolved it, internally, completely, without needing the person who caused the wound to acknowledge it. That resolution is the most radical act of self-possession a human being can perform. They no longer need you to understand what you did. They already know, and knowing was enough. Here is the beautiful contradiction that lives at the end of this journey. They never wanted power over anyone. They wanted love, real, mutual, honest love. But in the pursuit of that love, in the willingness to set down the false version and wait for the real thing, power found them. Not the kind that controls others, the kind that cannot be controlled. They are not trying to prove anything now. They are not waiting to be believed, validated, or finally seen by someone who spent years looking past them. They see themselves. And that gaze, steady, clear, unchased, is the most complete thing in the room. Sensitivity was never the weakness. It was the curriculum. Every absorbed grief, every felt betrayal, every moment they stayed when they should have left. It was not failure. It was training. Training to feel everything and still choose integrity. Training to love without losing the self. Training to know, in the marrow, what is real and what is performance. Once that training completes, the empath does not return to innocence. They return to truth. And truth does not shout. It does not convince. It does not chase. It stands. If you've made it this far, this wasn't just a video about empaths. It was a mirror. And recognition, that first quiet moment of seeing yourself clearly, is not the end of the journey. It is exactly where it begins.